Thank you so much for talking to us. This is a slightly peculiar, unusual way of doing an interview.
Behind the gilded, imposing walls of Buckingham Palace, a discovery has just emerged that could shake the royal family to its very core. A document hidden for decades has surfaced, and it directly concerns King Charles, Prince Harry, and a secret clause buried in the late Queen's will. This is no ordinary royal revelation. It's the kind of bombshell that can rewrite everything we thought we knew about the House of Windsor. What Queen Elizabeth left behind stunned the palace staff, the advisors, and the monarchy itself. It all began on the morning of November 23rd, 2025, like any other day in Buckingham's private offices. King Charles, seated at the same mahogany desk where his mother had once handled the kingdom's most sensitive business, was surrounded by centuries of leather-bound volumes, the weight of royal tradition pressing in on him. Yet, within the next hour, everything changed. Charles had called for a full, detailed review of his mother's estate documents. More than 3 years had passed since her death in September 2022, and legal formalities demanded periodic attention. What started as a routine check quickly became something far heavier. His senior legal counsel was present, along with the keeper of the privy purse and 2 trusted advisors, all prepared for what they assumed would be standard procedure. King Charles, in his dark suit, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, prepared for the tedium of administration, the dull weight of duty. Little did he know, the mundane was about to explode into the extraordinary. The leather-bound portfolio opened with a soft, almost reverent sound on the desk. Page after page detailed the estate's distribution: Balmoral, Sandringham, the private jewellery collection, all allocated and transferred as expected. Charles had reviewed these documents before, or so he believed. Every line matched what he knew, the main provisions executed precisely as protocol demanded. Then came the moment that would forever alter the royal landscape. Charles's hands, steady yet weathered by decades of duty, broke the final seal. Inside lay a document in Queen Elizabeth's own hand. Her handwriting, instantly recognisable, wasn't the flowing, youthful script of old. This was the deliberate, slightly shaky penmanship of her final months. Every line intentional, every word chosen with the precision of a monarch planning moves beyond the visible board. The date at the top read, March 15th, 2022, just 6 months before her death. Charles's breath caught as he began to read. Silence filled the room. His advisors, trained to watch without reaction, saw a shift cross their king's face, from curiosity to surprise, and then to something far more profound. This was no public mask, no rehearsed composure for a camera lens. This was deeply personal. Charles was reading his mother's last thoughts about his other son, the one who had left, the one whose absence had carved a permanent wound into the family. The clause before him was detailed, legally binding, and entirely unexpected. It directly concerned Prince Harry's inheritance and contradicted everything Charles believed he knew about his mother's final wishes, or perhaps it revealed a truth Elizabeth had deliberately kept hidden, saved for the exact moment when the family would need to confront it. Even in death, she was playing the long game. Always planning, always protecting, always thinking moves ahead that no one else could see. Charles read the passage 3 times. His legal counsel confirmed its authenticity, and it was legally enforceable. There was no doubt, no loophole, no escape. Only decisions, consequences, and the heavy burden of duty. It wasn't simply money or property. The clause carried conditions, stipulations, a framework designed to make Charles reconsider, to make him act. Between the king and his younger son, advisors cleared their throats, breaking the silence that had grown thick and tense. Should His Majesty take time to reflect privately? Should they prepare briefings for relevant parties? The questions hung, heavy, unanswered, as Charles's eyes remained locked on his mother's words. He removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose in exhaustion, imagining the scene at Windsor. Elizabeth, alone in her study, writing these words in secret, sealing them, knowing precisely what she was doing. Had she envisioned this moment? Her eldest son, king now, forced to navigate the crossroads she had laid before him. The weight of the crown felt suddenly heavier. Charles had inherited her throne, her responsibilities, her burdens, but he had not inherited the family crisis she had left unsolved, hidden in legal language crafted to compel him to act. The choice before him was simple, yet impossible. Honor her wishes, even if it complicated his own plans, or interpret duty in a way that served the present rather than the past. The clock ticked steadily on the mantelpiece. London continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the seismic shift inside. Charles knew one thing: whatever decision he made, there would be no turning back. His mother's hidden clause was now revealed, and the House of Windsor would have to deal with its consequences. So, what did the clause say? It set aside roughly £20 million from the Queen's private estate for Prince Harry, but it wasn't unconditional. The inheritance came with strict rules and expectations. Harry would only access the funds if he maintained meaningful connections to the UK and the Commonwealth. Elizabeth's wording was precise. He was required to spend no fewer than 90 days each year in Britain or Commonwealth nations, engaging in work that benefited charities or communities. This wasn't a demand to resume royal duties. Elizabeth was pragmatic. She knew the world had moved on, but she wanted Harry connected, engaged, rooted in the legacy she had spent 70 years building. The clause also addressed Harry's children, Archie and Lilibet. Around £5 million was earmarked for their education and upbringing, to be managed by trustees approved by both Harry and the reigning monarch. This ensured Charles would retain oversight, protecting the family's interests and keeping the next generation connected to the UK. Even more telling was the insistence that the children spend meaningful time in Britain as they grew. The Queen wanted them to know their heritage, never becoming strangers to the land of their ancestors. Her foresight was both emotional and strategic, blending family loyalty with a long view of the monarchy's future. Attached was a personal letter to Charles, meant to be read only when this clause surfaced. Elizabeth acknowledged the anger, the hurt, and the sense of betrayal surrounding Harry, but she also reminded her son, cutting straight to the heart, that Harry was still her grandson and Archie and Lilibet her great-grandchildren. She could not leave this world without one last attempt to ensure they remained part of the family she cherished so fiercely. And now, that responsibility, that decision, falls squarely on King Charles. The Queen's final moves, crafted in secrecy, demand action. History watches, London ticks on, and the royal family must face the consequences of a hidden will that refuses to stay buried. The letter to Charles contained a request, not a command, but the earnest hope of a mother on the verge of leaving the world. She asked him to consider that bridges once burned can sometimes be rebuilt, but only if both sides are willing to supply the materials. Her inheritance clause, she explained, was her attempt to supply those materials, carefully designed to foster connection where separation had grown too deep. What Charles and Harry chose to build with those resources would be entirely up to them. She wanted them to have the tools, both financial and emotional, to reach across the gulf that years of tension had created. The legal team had confirmed that the clause was ironclad. The Queen had consulted with her most trusted legal minds, people who had served her for decades, and together they had crafted language that would leave no room for ambiguity. Every word was deliberate, meant to withstand scrutiny and make her intentions unmistakably clear. This was not a suggestion to be brushed aside or reinterpreted at convenience. This was the will of a queen, but more than that, it was the will of a mother and grandmother who had run out of time to fix matters herself, yet refused to give up entirely, even in death. The sum of money involved was considerable, but by royal standards, it was measured with precision. Elizabeth had been shrewd enough to know that too large an amount could create complications, make Harry appear as if he were being bought, or fuel media narratives of favouritism. £20 million was sufficient to provide genuine security and opportunity, but it would not overshadow the deeper purpose of the provision: connection, family, and ensuring that bonds were not irreparably broken. As Charles read through the document, he could almost hear his mother's voice. The phrasing was unmistakably hers, practical, yet imbued with emotion, firm, yet tinged with hope. She had known she was dying. She had known that the situation with Harry would soon become Charles's problem to resolve, and so she had left him this, a tool, perhaps a burden, maybe both, a hidden clause, carefully placed within her will, waiting to be discovered at the right time. This was a hidden plea, a final attempt to keep her family whole, even as she prepared to leave it behind. To truly understand why Queen Elizabeth included this clause requires examining the evolution of her relationship with Harry, particularly during the turbulent years following his departure from official royal duties. The Queen had always harboured a special affection for Harry, a warmth noted by those closest to the family. From his earliest years, he had brought laughter into her life, a spark of irreverence that reminded her of her own youth, before the weight of duty had crystallized every spontaneous impulse into protocol. The decision by Harry and Meghan to step back from royal life in January 2020 had blindsided her. Sources close to the palace at the time described her as hurt and disappointed, not because Harry had chosen a different path, but because the announcement had been made without proper consultation, thrusting the institution into a reactive position. Yet even in that hurt, those who knew her best said Elizabeth's primary concern was always Harry's well-being and the security of his future. The Oprah interview in March 2021 added further strain. Allegations about racism within the family, claims of insufficient support during Meghan's mental health struggles, and the suggestion that the institution had been cold and uncaring. All of this wounded her deeply. As both monarch and grandmother, Elizabeth felt these criticisms keenly. The Queen represented the institution, and attacks on it often felt personal. Her public response had been measured, including the now famous line that recollections may vary, a diplomatic acknowledgement that multiple perspectives existed. Privately, however, friends reported that she was deeply troubled by the breakdown in family relationships. She understood the fragility of what remained and the urgency of what still needed mending. What many outside the palace did not realise was that throughout this period, the Queen maintained private communication with Harry. They spoke by phone, not frequently, but consistently enough that the connection remained intact. Through these conversations, she made it clear, in ways only a grandmother could, that her love for him endured regardless of the choices he had made. She did not agree with every decision Harry had taken. She did not condone the public nature of the disputes, the way family rifts played out in headlines and interviews. Yet he was still her grandson, and that bond was something no palace protocol could fully erase. In her final year, as her health declined noticeably, those around her saw a woman coming to terms with her mortality. Quietly, she arranged her affairs, making peace with what she would leave undone. The Harry situation sat at the top of that list. Throughout her 70-year reign, Elizabeth had navigated crises of state and personal matters with remarkable skill. She had modernised the monarchy, preserving its essential character while adapting to a changing world. She had held the Commonwealth together through decades of upheaval, yet she could not repair the rift in her own family, and that lingering failure haunted her deeply. The drafting of the hidden clause appears to have taken place in late 2021 and early 2022, during a convergence of factors. Her health was in noticeable decline. Harry and Meghan had settled in California, showing little intention of returning to royal duties. The Jubilee celebrations were approaching, and uncertainty loomed over whether Harry would attend. Within this context, Elizabeth seems to have decided that action was necessary, but not through public gestures or family meetings, which had repeatedly failed. She chose the one tool she still fully controlled: her will. Consulting her most trusted legal advisor, a man who understood both the intricacies of royal law and the dynamics of the family, she crafted language designed to achieve multiple goals simultaneously. She wanted to secure Harry's financial future, removing it as a potential source of stress or embarrassment. She wanted to ensure his children would remain connected to their British heritage. And perhaps, most importantly, she sought to create a structure that required Charles and Harry to communicate, negotiate, and cooperate to implement the provision. The decision to keep the clause hidden until after a full estate review was deliberate. Elizabeth did not want this to emerge immediately after her death. She did not want it leaked or exploited during the early days of Charles's reign, when he would be establishing authority and stability. She reasoned that only after the acute phase of grief and public adjustment had passed would the provision have its intended effect, received in the spirit she envisioned. In the personal letter attached to the clause, she revealed the depth of her thinking. She acknowledged that she had failed, in many ways, to keep her family united during her lifetime. She admitted that perhaps she had waited too long to intervene decisively, trusting that family members would reconcile on their own. By the time she recognized the depth of the rifts, her declining health and the strictures of her role made direct intervention impossible. Understanding the Queen's intentions paints a portrait of a woman who loved deeply, who regarded the fracturing of her family as a personal failure, yet refused to accept it as permanent. She had endured storms the world could scarcely imagine, and she believed that truly tested family bonds should withstand even the most severe disagreements. Her hidden clause was the ultimate expression of that belief, a final effort to ensure the test would not result in permanent separation. Charles's dilemma, sitting in his private office with the document still in hand, was both profoundly personal and deeply constitutional. The personal aspect was obvious. This was his mother's dying wish regarding his son. The constitutional aspect was equally weighty. King Charles's decisions carried implications far beyond family dynamics, touching on the stability, perception, and traditions of the monarchy itself. Whatever Charles chose to do with this revelation would send loud signals about his reign, his priorities, and his vision for the future of the monarchy. His relationship with Harry had deteriorated sharply since the move to California. Public accusations, the Netflix documentary, and Harry's memoir, filled with harsh criticisms of Charles as a father and as a future king, had cut deeper than any political opposition ever could. All of this had wounded him profoundly. Charles had spent a lifetime preparing to be king, developing a thick skin to withstand criticism, yet criticism from one's own son, broadcast to the entire world, pierced even the toughest armor. The anger Charles felt was raw and immediate, but it coexisted uneasily with the enduring love he had for Harry, creating a constant internal tension that gnawed at him day and night. Prince William's reaction would also carry enormous weight. The Prince of Wales had been far less forgiving than his father. Regarding Harry's departure and subsequent public comments, the bond between the brothers, once close, even inseparable, had fractured, perhaps beyond repair. William viewed Harry's actions as betrayals, not just to the family, but to the institution of the monarchy itself. William had long advised his father to take a firm line, to make clear that choices had consequences. The discovery of the Queen's hidden clause, however, threatened to complicate William's position and could spark friction between Charles and his heir. With that in mind, Charles arranged a private meeting with William for the following day. The conversation promised to be difficult. Charles needed to inform his eldest son of the clause before deciding on a course of action. William had a right to know, but more pragmatically, Charles needed his support, or at least his understanding. If father and son were publicly at odds over how to handle Harry, it would produce the very kind of family drama that weakened the monarchy and supplied months of sensational headlines. The meeting took place in Charles's private sitting room. William arrived alone, immediately sensing from his father's tone that this was serious. When Charles explained what had been discovered, William's face darkened. He listened without interruption, jaw tightening as the details emerged. When Charles finally fell silent, the Prince of Wales's response was sharp and immediate. Grandmother had overstepped. She had no right to bind the family to conditions that would compel reconciliation with someone who had repeatedly attacked them publicly. The money was one thing, but the clause requiring Harry to spend time in the UK and giving his father oversight of how his children were raised felt like manipulation from beyond the grave. Charles let his son vent. He understood the anger and even shared some of it, yet he also knew his mother well enough to recognize her motivations. He felt the weight of duty and obligation that came with being her son and successor. She had asked him, as directly as a queen and mother could, to give Harry one more chance, to allow her final gift to serve as an opportunity for healing. Could he simply refuse? Should he? The question was far more complicated than William seemed to grasp. The conversation with his eldest son lasted over an hour. No consensus was reached. William made his position clear. If Charles honoured the provision and offered Harry the inheritance with all its conditions, William would neither obstruct nor support the move. He would not pretend to welcome Harry's return to spending significant time in the UK. He would remain civil if required, but no more. The wounds were too deep, the trust too broken. Charles could play the role of the forgiving father if he chose, but William would remain the protective older brother who had not forgotten the pain Harry had caused Catherine and their children. Beyond family dynamics, Charles had to consider the broader implications for the monarchy. Public opinion on Harry was sharply divided. Some viewed him as a victim of an outdated institution, a man who had chosen love and mental health over duty and tradition. Others saw him as spoiled, ungrateful, willing to exploit his royal connection for commercial gain while publicly attacking the family that had provided everything. How the public would react to news of a substantial inheritance tied to conditions clearly designed to draw Harry back was unpredictable. Some could perceive it as compassionate, family-oriented, and wise. Others might view it as weakness, a monarchy held hostage by someone who had already taken so much and returned so little. Charles's advisors were split. The older generation, loyal to the traditions his mother had championed, counselled honouring her wishes fully and immediately. They spoke of duty, of respect for the dead, and the importance of family unity. The younger advisors, more focused on public perception and the optics of a modern monarchy, were cautious. They worried about setting precedents, rewarding perceived bad behaviour, or appearing controlled by a will, even that of a deceased queen. Late that night, Charles sat alone in his study. He reflected on his mother, the countless times she had guided him, advised him, and sometimes overruled him. She had been his North Star, the constant by which he navigated decades of preparation for the role he now held. She had not been perfect. Mistakes had been made. Yet her love for her family was undeniable, and her dedication to the monarchy absolute. This clause was her final piece of guidance, her last instruction delivered from beyond death. Could he ignore it? More importantly, should he? The dilemma he faced was ultimately about what kind of king he wanted to be, and what kind of father he wished to be remembered as, and whether those two identities could coexist in this fraught moment. His mother had tried to give him a path forward, but walking it would require courage, forgiveness, and a willingness to risk further pain. Should Harry reject the olive branch or accept it, yet fail to meet the conditions? The discovery of the hidden clause provided no easy answers. It only made the questions more urgent and the stakes impossibly high. 3,000 miles away in Montecito, Prince Harry had no idea that his grandmother's will contained a provision specifically designed for him, or that his father had just discovered it and was wrestling with what to do next. Harry's life in California had settled into a rhythm that was dramatically different from his royal existence, yet, in some ways, surprisingly similar. Netflix projects, memoir deals, and speaking engagements demanded a level of public performance not unlike royal duties, just with different masters and different rules. Financially, he and Meghan were secure, but not to the extent of a generational fortune that would allow total independence. The Netflix and Spotify deals provided substantial sums, but sustaining their lifestyle and funding various charitable initiatives required ongoing income. Harry had been born into wealth, but he had not inherited a fortune that allowed him to simply coast. He still needed to work, bridging the delicate balance between royal legacy and commercial enterprise, all while navigating the public scrutiny that followed him everywhere. The relationship with his father remained tense. Their conversations were sporadic, brief, often restricted to logistics concerning the children or unavoidable family events. Charles had attended Harry's coronation events, but the visits were short, the interactions minimal. Condolences and support during Charles's cancer diagnosis in 2024 had been offered politely, but warmth was scarce. The wall between them loomed high, growing taller with each month of silence. The conditions attached to the inheritance promised immediate friction. Spending 90 days per year in the UK or Commonwealth countries was no small ask. It would mean significant time away from the life Harry and Meghan had built in California. It would mean exposure to the British press, to the very environment they had fled because of its toxicity and the toll it had taken on their mental health. Meghan's willingness to return regularly to the UK was doubtful at best. She had made it clear that she felt unsafe there, that the racism and harassment she had endured had left deep, lasting scars. Asking her to agree to frequent visits would test her marriage with Harry in ways he might not be ready or willing to risk. And the provision about their children would be even more sensitive, a delicate tangle of family, heritage, and personal freedom. Harry and Meghan had fiercely protected Archie and Lily Bit, keeping them largely shielded from the public eye and raising them in California with a blend of American values and perspectives. The idea that trustees approved by King Charles would have oversight of funds set aside for their education and upbringing could feel like intrusion. A reminder that even across an ocean, the palace still wanted influence over their lives. The clause requiring the children to spend meaningful time in the UK as they grew older raised a host of questions. What exactly constituted meaningful time? How would it be enforced? Who would decide the parameters of connection to their heritage? And yet, there was another side to consider. Harry might also see, in his grandmother's careful provision, something he had been searching for, evidence that he had not been completely cut off, that there were still family members willing to reach out, who wanted connection rather than estrangement. His bond with the Queen had remained special, even through the worst family conflicts. She had been a source of stability, a well of unconditional love in ways that other family members had struggled to provide. Learning that she had spent her final months carefully engineering a possible way back for him could pierce the defensive armor he had spent years building around his heart and his public persona. Meghan's influence on Harry's decisions would be profound. She had been a catalyst, perhaps the catalyst, that finally gave him the courage to step away from royal life. Her perspective on the family was coloured by her own experiences of feeling unsupported, targeted, and misunderstood. She had built a life for them in America, full of opportunities, networks, and freedom that could be disrupted by a requirement to spend substantial time in the UK. Her voice in this decision would be decisive, but it was far from clear which way she might lean. Then there was the matter of Harry's children. What did he owe them? Did he have the right to keep them entirely detached from their British heritage, from their royal lineage, from potential relationships with their grandfather, uncle, and cousins? As Archie and Lilibet grew, would they resent being kept away? The Queen's provision seemed carefully designed to prevent such alienation, to ensure that even if adult relationships remained strained, the children would have a chance to forge their own meaningful bonds with the family. What was certain was that Harry could not emerge from this revelation unchanged. Learning that his grandmother had spent her final months thinking about him, worrying about his future, and creating a bridge that might survive her death would force him to confront a storm of complex emotions: love, guilt, anger, gratitude, suspicion, hope, all competing for dominance as he tried to decide how to respond to this unexpected gift from beyond the grave. Charles's advisors recommended a hybrid approach. A formal legal notification would be sent through proper channels, outlining the inheritance, its conditions, and the process for claiming it. Simultaneously, Charles would write a personal letter, brief yet measured, acknowledging the discovery of his mother's provision and expressing his intention to honour her wishes. The letter would not plead or demand, but would open a door, create a space for conversation if Harry chose to walk through it. The timeline for Harry's response would be crucial. The legal documents would specify a period, likely 90 days, during which Harry could formally accept or reject the inheritance terms. Acceptance would trigger a series of legal and practical steps. Trustees would need to be appointed, frameworks for monitoring compliance established, mechanisms for the children's funds implemented. All of this required communication between Harry's representatives and the palace, reviving interactions that had been minimal, distant, and tense for years. Rejection, in some ways, would be simpler, yet more complicated in others. If Harry formally declined the inheritance, the funds would revert to the general estate and be redistributed according to the will's other provisions. But the public relations fallout could be severe. He might be seen as principled, unwilling to accept conditions on his autonomy, or as ungrateful, turning down his grandmother's dying gift. Because it came with stipulations, the media narrative would be hotly contested for months. The most likely scenario, however, might be neither immediate acceptance nor outright rejection, but negotiation. Harry's lawyers would almost certainly seek modifications, arguing that the terms were too restrictive or impractical. Perhaps the 90 days per year could be reduced to 60, or spread across multiple years instead of annually. Maybe the trusteeship for the children's funds could be modified to give Harry and Meghan more control. Even with her famously thorough drafting, the Queen's language left room for interpretation. For King Charles, these negotiations would be a test of not just legal or political skill, but of understanding, empathy, and the ability to see beyond technicalities to human emotion. How much should he bend to accommodate Harry's concerns? How much should he insist on honouring the literal letter of his mother's wishes? Finding the right balance would demand wisdom, sensitivity, and patience. Charles would have to understand his son, gauge what might genuinely coax him back versus what could push him further away. Decades of negotiation and diplomacy had prepared him in theory, but never for a challenge this personal, fraught, and unpredictable. The stakes extended beyond Harry alone. The potential impact on other royals, particularly William's children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, added layers of complexity. These cousins had been denied connections that should have been nurtured, casualties of adult conflict. If Harry returned to the UK for substantial periods, would there finally be opportunities for bonds to form between them? Or would William continue to keep a distance, maintaining control over the younger generation's exposure? The Queen's vision seemed designed to mend these generational rifts, but success depended on the cooperation of multiple family members, not all of whom shared her conciliatory instincts. Realistically, the process could be messy and partial. Harry might accept the money but resist fully embracing the spirit of the conditions. He might comply technically, spending the required time in the UK or Commonwealth while keeping an emotional distance. Relationships could remain cordial, functional, but cool. Reconciliation without transformation, connection without warmth. This would be a sort of halfway healing, but not the profound family restoration Elizabeth had hoped for when drafting her hidden clause. The worst-case scenario remained chilling. Harry could accept the inheritance, yet publicly criticise its conditions, turning the Queen's gift into a weapon in an ongoing saga of perceived palace control. The press would feast on such a narrative, amplifying conflict and potentially damaging both Harry's reputation and the monarchy's public image. Charles would be portrayed as weak, manipulated or cruel, attempting to restore family bonds, yet simultaneously accused of coercion. Even so, the Queen had offered them more than had existed before. Her hidden clause was not perfect, but it was a framework, an invitation to reconnect if all parties were willing. The path forward remained uncertain, fraught with emotional and practical landmines, yet for the first time in years, a grandmother's hand had drawn a map showing a possible return from estrangement. Again, the hidden clause in Queen Elizabeth's will had emerged from secrecy into the harsh light of reality. King Charles now held both a burden and an opportunity, a test and a gift from his mother. What he and Harry chose to do with it would shape not just their relationship, but the future of the monarchy itself. The clock was ticking, decisions had to be made, and across the thousands of miles that separated London from California, a family's fate hovered in suspension, caught between the lingering pain of the past and the fragile possibilities of what might come next. If you found this inside look into the Queen's hidden clause shocking and intriguing, smash that like, subscribe for more royal revelations, share this with friends who love palace drama, and leave a comment on what you think Harry should do next.